Hello, everyone. I'm Vance Ballard with the National Sports Media Association, and joining me today is voice of the Mississippi State Bulldogs, all three of the big sports now, and first-time winner of the Mississippi Sportscaster of the Year award, Neil Price. Neil, thank you for joining me. How are you
Good.
today?
I'm great, Vance. Good to see you.
Good to see you, and congratulations on the newly appointed title as well as the first-time award.
Thank you.
Very welcome. So we'll start you with an easy one today, Neil. When did you know that sportscasting was a career for you?
Uh, I can't remember if I was 11 or 12, but it was somewhere in that ballpark. And I grew up in East Tennessee. John Ward was doing Tennessee football and basketball at that time. This would have been 1991, 1992. And I remember distinctly being on a ride with my dad, who had a 1985 Ford Ranger. And we were driving along the Appalachian Highway, somewhere between Morristown and White Pine, Tennessee. And we're listening to a Tennessee football game. This would have been early in their season that year. And I just remember having this light bulb come on, thinking, John Ward's got a pretty cool job. And there are a lot of people just like me who are huddled around a radio somewhere, or maybe they're mowing their yard and they're listening in a set of headphones, or maybe they're sitting at Neyland Stadium listening to the game. But they're listening to John Ward. They care what he has to say. And on top of that, he gets to go to every Tennessee football and basketball game for free. He gets to ride on a charter bus. He gets to fly on a charter airplane. And he's popular enough that he could run for governor and win. I just thought all those things were really cool. And I probably was at a stage of life where I understood. I was playing football at that time in middle school. And I knew even then I was not going to be a great athlete. I had friends that were and were going to play in high school, and some that would play beyond in small college. And I knew if I wanted to keep running in that circle of friends, I better find a way to be useful, because being useful on the field or useful on the floor was not going to be for me. So my way to do that was to get involved in introducing the starting lineups before middle school basketball games, and then later doing that in high school, and then starting to work at a local radio station when I was 15 years old, and following those teams around, helping out, whether it was carrying equipment or reading stats at halftime, or doing a little pregame and postgame stuff, whether it was interviews or a little segment here or there. And then ultimately doing a handful of games by the time I got out of high school. That's how I got into it. It was nothing really earth shattering, nothing really dramatic. It was just, I thought a guy that I enjoyed listening to had a really cool job, and it might be really cool to do that and get to hang out with my friends while I was doing
Nothing wrong with that. And something tells me, Neil, you're not the only person to have an aha moment in the front seat of a Tennessee pickup truck.
I'd say not. John was incredibly popular. I was fortunate to meet him a handful of times over about the last 20 years of his life, including about 3 months before he passed. Bob Kessling, who is exiting his role as the radio announcer at Tennessee in April. Bob probably is my biggest mentor and certainly my best friend in this business. And Bob set up a meeting to go by and see John. And it was nothing more than, I had just gotten a job at Mississippi State about a year and a half before. And it was just a chance to walk in and look him in the eye and say thank you. And it's a great memory that I'll have for the remainder of my life, to tell somebody that, hey, you don't know me like you've mentored some others who have come through and gone to school at Tennessee and have been around you, but you planted that seed in the mind of a little 11 or 12-year-old kid that this is a pretty cool way to make a living, and it's a pretty fun job. And I just chased that example from the time that I heard that game in that Ford Ranger, and I'm still chasing it in a lot of ways, even doing games now at an SEC school, because I just thought he was the best. And if you did what he did, then surely you'd have a chance to reach some level of success in your career. So it was really cool to get to tell him thank you for that.
Right. And it's really cool to hear you talk about it that way and just see what all, then hear what that means to you coming from your point of view. You touched on it there. You're now at an SEC school, baseball, basketball, football. You do all three now. Tell me more about your journey to how you got here in Mississippi State.
Well, like I told you, I started working in radio when I was 15 years old at WCRK in Morristown, Tennessee, 5,000-watt daytimer at that time. And young people may not know what daytimer means, but literally it came on when the sun came up and it went off when the sun went down, unless there was a Tennessee football game. And then we stayed on later until the
Right.
football game ended. But I started doing that when I was 15. My parents drove me to work the first year I had a job, and then I got a car and got my license at 16 and started driving myself. And I started like a lot of people did, Vance, at that time on Sunday mornings, helping put preachers on the air, churches. I did that from 6 a.m. in the morning until noon. And then the Tennessee Titans were relatively new to our
Mhm.
state at that time. So we started carrying their games. So I would work on Sunday mornings with the church programs. And then I would stay till about 5 o'clock in the afternoon covering the board shift, running NFL football games. That's how I got started. And as the people at the station developed trust with me, they would allow me to fill in on afternoon drive when the afternoon drive guy would take a vacation, or morning drive, which was a huge deal. The morning drive guy, there was a guy named Ed Dodson who was on that station for more than half a century. And everyone in, probably 7 counties knew who Ed Dodson was. And if you got to fill in for Ed Dodson, that was a big deal. I got to do that for a little while. And I did that part time for 5 years from age 15 to 20. And it opened doors for me later to do junior college basketball. I went to Walter State Community College for 2 years. I did their games, men's and women's basketball for 2 years. Was great experience for me from ages 18 to 20 years old to do 2 games a night, basically every Wednesday night and every Saturday afternoon. And you know what? By the time I transferred to Middle Tennessee State, I had so much experience that it helped open a door for me there to do baseball and then later women's basketball games and get to be the sideline reporter for the football broadcasts. And after I got my degree, University of Kentucky was looking for someone in 2005 to do baseball. And I sent in a tape. I'd built some relationships at that point with people like Bob Kessling, who I mentioned earlier. Had a couple of references that could really help me there, and wound up going to Kentucky doing baseball and then later women's basketball there. And same kind of thing, worked in with the football crew. And by the time that I left there to come to state in 2017, I was helping produce the football broadcast. I was hosting the pregame show on the football broadcast. I was doing the women's basketball games. I was doing the baseball games, hosting an hour show about Olympic sports every week. They just turned me loose with anything that they wanted to try. And I was glad to do it. That's kind of been the story of my career. I had a hard time telling people no. And I
Mhm.
just tried to do a little bit of everything. And that's a great strategy when you're young. As you get older, it's a little bit harder to do that sometimes. But when you're young, man, just do all of it and see where it leads. But I came to state in 17. Same thing, built a connection while I was at Kentucky that helped a great deal here. First baseball coach I worked with at UK was a guy named John Cohen. John Cohen left Kentucky about 2008 to come to state where he had played and went to school to be the baseball coach. Later left that role to become the athletic director here, and he was the AD that hired me in 2017. So I say all that to say to the young people who are getting into this business who may be listening or watching our conversation, meet as many people as you can, shake as many hands as you can, because you never know which one of them is going to be the one who's going to turn the knob that opens the door to give you that break you've been looking for. So that's kind of the Cliff Notes version of it. But it's been a great ride. I've worked at 2 SEC schools. I never dreamed I'd work at one in my career. I've met a lot of great people along the way, been able to see a lot of cool things, and it has been a terrific ride.
And it sounds like it. It sounds like it's been something you've done nothing but enjoy the entire way through.
Yeah, I've tried to, and I think sometimes I got caught up in the climb trying to get to that SEC job at Kentucky and later to the football job and the men's basketball job here at State. And the thing that I regret in some of that I think is also important for young people to keep in mind is there's something to be said for being where your feet are. I look back a lot of times on doing those junior college games at Walter State. And I could walk into the men's or women's basketball coach's office, the baseball or softball coach's office on a given day and sit down and talk to those guys as an 18-year-old. And I got so many life lessons from just spending time with them. I'd go on recruiting trips with our women's basketball coach, and I had more fun. I didn't know a thing about recruiting, and I wasn't there for that reason. But just to go sit in the bleachers with him sometimes and just watch players and hear him break down the game and what made somebody a good player, what was the difference between a marginal player and a player he'd want on his team, and then just to talk about anything other than basketball. Those were great moments. Same thing at Middle Tennessee when I was there. The baseball trips at Middle were bus trips in the Sun Belt, which was a hard bus league. There were a lot of long trips, but our coaches and being around the players, and those guys were roughly my age, it made it fun, you know. But I was always focused, I think, on what's next, and I maybe neglected really enjoying where I was at that point in life sometimes. So if there's something I would tell people, it's don't make that mistake. There's nothing wrong with wanting to have a bigger and better job. There is nothing wrong with that. But take some time to smell the roses where you are too, because what I have found is that as you continue that climb, that part never returns. I can't walk into an office at Mississippi State, couldn't do it at Kentucky, certainly, and just sit down and talk to a coach because there's a huge demand placed on their time at this level that maybe didn't exist on the way up. And it's something that was pretty cool to be able to do, 20 years ago. So if you're on the way up, just remember that you'll get there, but enjoy where you are while you're making that climb too.
That's awesome. That's good to hear and important for, like you say, people in my position, students, young professionals, to kind of don't forget to just be aware of the moment that you're in and just take a step back and breathe through that for a minute.
Yeah.
It's important for us to remember that as well. You kind of touched on it there, some of your relationships, some of your peers, but this is your first Sportscaster of the Year award. What can you put into words what it means to have your work recognized and appreciated by those very same peers to the point where they feel you deserve this award?
Well, I think that's the neatest thing about it is it's voted on by your peers, and I haven't had a chance to meet everyone in the state, obviously, even though I've been here going on 8 years. But to know that there are people who do what I do, who work in the media, who cover sports, and that they think that my work deserves some kind of notoriety, that means a lot to me because they know what it takes to do it. They're putting in the long hours and the weird hours and the nights and the weekends. They're doing all that stuff too, sacrificing time away from family. I've been there too. It is a fun job. I would never say that it's easy because we don't do everything between 8 and 5. We do 8 and 5 and sometimes well beyond that in a lot of cases. But it means a lot to me. And if any of them are watching who voted for me during this, hey, thank you. Means a lot. And hopefully I can return the favor one
day. Exactly. Now your 8 to 5, your left field lounge doesn't even get started till after 5 some nights.
No, it's always 5 o'clock out there.
I was
always.
about to say it. Yeah, that the clock, it only has one time on it.
That's it.
And speaking of that, the left field lounge, we mentioned in the intro, you were recently named the new voice of the Diamond Dogs, the Mississippi State baseball team. Congratulations on that, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, you'll be stepping into the shoes of 46-year veteran Jim Ellis. It'll technically be the second time you've done it since you kind of filled in when you came in for basketball and football for him as well. What is it like preparing to step into the shoes of someone who carries the weight in college baseball or in the sport that Jim Ellis does?
Oh, well, I think it'll be the hardest thing I've had to do since I've been here. We had this conversation the other day with some folks in the athletic department. Jack Crystal's shadow looms large here. So Jack Crystal did state games for 58 years. Jim worked with Jack for about 3 decades of that, give or take. And then after Jack retired in 2011, Jim took over and he did all three sports for 7 years, and then decided that he wanted to focus on baseball. So I came in to do football and men's basketball, and Jim continued to do baseball. One of three guys, by the way, in the state of Mississippi who all are 46 years plus doing college baseball. So, I mean, he is a big deal. He made the football and basketball job easier for me to step into because he followed Jack Crystal, and did it with a lot of professionalism, did it with a lot of grace. And it's not easy to be the guy who follows the guy. It's just not. It is much easier to be the guy who follows the guy who followed the guy, which is what Jim allowed me to do. But I won't have that luxury in baseball because Jim is the guy and has been here for, nearly a half century of doing the games. And, as popular as state baseball is, Jim made it that way because he was the guy when he started doing the games in 79 who started building a radio network, who crisscrossed the state, getting people interested in Bulldogs baseball, who, from the ground up, kind of helped it become what it is today. And for all the great players and the names you hear, Will Clark, Rafael Palmeiro, Bobby Thigpen, Jeff Brantley, any number of those guys, Jim Ellis deserves to be on that list too, because he helped grow the popularity of the brand and the sport in this state. So this will be much more difficult for me in terms of stepping into a role where I'm going to be under the microscope and the expectation is going to be really high because Jim made it that way. And I think that says a lot about the way he approached his job all those years.
Exactly, it does. Now, you've come from Kentucky. Baseball is no stranger to you. You've done plenty of baseball games before, but what's it been like, your relationship with Jim, and has he had any wisdom taking on this role in a, I don't want to downplay Kentucky's baseball environment, but it's not Mississippi State at the same time, if that makes sense.
No, it's different, no question. And it was when I was doing the UK games and got to know Jim back in the mid 2000s. I mean, yeah, it was a different deal. We were playing in a 3,000 seat ballpark at that time, and that might even be generous when you're talking about the number of seats in there. And State was putting 10 or 12,000 a night in their ballpark here. Now that gap is closed. I mean, Kentucky made it to the World Series for the first time in their history last year, and no one was happier about that than me, sitting there on the couch watching it, because I was there when that was the goal, and we always came up short somehow. So to see them make it was great, but the expectation at State has always been to play in supers and to play in the College World Series, and as many times as they've been there, they finally broke through and won it 3 years ago. And it was, validation in a lot of ways, I think, for the program, that it had been thought of as one of the iconic programs in the sport for a long time, but it's still awful hard to win a national championship. It just is. So it will be different. There are people here who follow baseball probably more religiously than they follow football and basketball. It's kind of what they live for. So again, you want to make sure you're doing your best. But have Jim and I talked about that? No, we haven't talked about it at all. We haven't talked about the transition. But he knows how much respect I have for him. He has been as good to me since I have been here, and even before, as anyone. And I think the world of him, and I want to do a good job because I want to make sure we represent Jim in the right way too.
Right. And I'm sure you'll have no troubles doing that based on your career and the work that you bring with it. And touching a little bit on that, I'm sure by this point in your career, you've got your game preparation routine down to a science. We were talking a little bit before we started recording. You're now, for the first time in 8 years, having to prepare for two games at the same time, again, back in basketball and baseball season. So what's it like, the differences in prep going from sport to sport?
Well, I won't tell you that I've got anything down to a science, Vance, because what I've learned is that the minute you think you do, there's a better mousetrap. There's a better way to do things. I have probably embraced technology more in the last 6 months than I have at any time since I've been doing this with relation to how I prepare. And some of that was out of necessity. So for 15 months, in addition to doing football and men's basketball, I was running a radio station on a daily basis on campus, staff of one. So you're doing a little bit of everything. And as much as I love that, what I learned is that it was taking up a lot of time, and I had to really become laser focused in the hours I had after work to sit down and put a plan together for a football broadcast or a basketball broadcast. So I embraced technology as much as I could. Are there ways that we can automate processes that can get some of the basic things done for me that took a lot of time, like just writing stats, finding rankings of stats for players in the conference and nationally, the teams in the conference and nationally. And it wound up taking, a couple hours a week off my plate where I could just be ahead of the game and really dive into trying to find the great stories or the anecdotes that you could use on the air to talk about player X, Y, or Z in either of those sports. I fought that for years. I told you before we started recording, one of the people that I learned from, Bob Kessling, is primarily the biggest mentor I've had in the business. But another guy is from your hometown. His name is Woody Durham. I think Woody was one of the iconic broadcasters, not just in the ACC, but in college sports. And when I was at Kentucky early on, I read this article about Woody on the North Carolina Athletic website. They shadowed him for a day. And I was fascinated in the paragraphs that talked about his process. And he would get out these multicolored pens and all these index cards with information on them and his charts. And they went into detail about how all that looked. So Woody had an email on the athletic website and just shot in the dark. I sent him an email, 26-year-old, kid doing Kentucky women's basketball games, and told him about that article, asked him if I could learn more about it. And Woody sent me a manila envelope filled with charts, football and basketball, all those index cards that he kept all that information on, and said, here's my number. Call me at 8 o'clock on Sunday night. I'll explain what all of it means and answer any questions you got. And that part really changed my way of thinking, that conversation, all of it, because I was into style when I was younger. I was stupid at that time too. Style's one thing, but substance is so much more. So I had these really nice printed out computer charts, and I just thought, I had all this information organized. But I told Woody, I said, I put all this work in. It looks great. I don't remember any of it when the game starts. He says, do you write any of it down? Well, no. He said, I write everything down. And that changed my direction immediately. I started to write everything by hand. Well, when you're only doing games and that's your only job, you can do that and you can get away with it and you can devote the time to it every week to do it. My football boards, when I first got to state, those things were like kindercraft meets sports broadcasting. It was an arts and crafts project every week. It felt like to lay those things out. And it just got to a point when I was managing the radio station and doing that, I said, I'm going to drown if I don't find a better way to do this. Mm-hmm. And Tony Castricone, who is at Washington, Tony is a guy who's a little younger than me, but he embraced the technology. He figured out how to do it. And I've learned from him. Just, hey, show me how you do this, because I got to find a way to be more efficient. And what I've learned now is it's a hybrid. It's a lot of the computer automating the stats, doing the basic stuff for me, so I don't have to take the time to do that. And then once I get that stuff printed out, I can really begin to read and spend time making those handwritten notes about the anecdotes, the things that are human interest, that kind of are more sidebar, more than the general information that everybody knows, that hopefully help make the broadcast stand out or give them a different view of a player or a coach than maybe they would have just based on general knowledge. So it's not an exact science. It's constantly evolving. And the thing I have learned is that everyone does it differently. And there's nothing wrong with that, because there are no two of us who do this job the same. So I think that's part of the cool thing about it. There's a great piece of video that was on the internet. I don't remember if it was something that the Tennessee people tweeted out a while back or what it was, but it was John Ward and Larry Munson, who to me are two of the four guys on the Mount Rushmore of SEC broadcasters, sitting in the press box at Sanford Stadium, and they're comparing spot boards with one another. And they're just sitting there talking. Larry Munson was doing the Falcons at that time too. Well, I use an NFL board, and I've got, and yours is more like, and just going through all this stuff. And I'm just like, even those guys would sit down and try to compare the process and how they did it. So, yeah, it's constantly evolving. And I'm sure by the time I get to the end of baseball season and start looking at football again for next year, it'll change again. There'll be some tweak that'll be made. And if you're not doing that and it becomes stale and stagnant, I just don't know that you're still growing in the business. And my goal is to be the best I can be. And if that means that an old dog's got to learn a new trick, then I'm willing to try to learn it.
Exactly. And your career path as of late has done nothing but been indicative of that, Neil. And this has been fantastic. I could listen to you talk about this and tell your stories all day long for hours on end. But as we wrap things up here, I'll ask, you've kind of touched on it here and there as you've talked. What's maybe one more piece of advice that you were given at a young age or that you've picked up that you could pass along to students or someone, in my case, like a young professional trying to get started in sports media?
I don't know that it's one piece of advice, but I'm gonna give you two thoughts that I've had in my career. The two biggest things, Vance, for me that have helped me get to where I am today: repetition, always looking for opportunities to do games, whether that's the local high school, the junior college, the small. You're doing D3 games, the small college, any opportunity you have as a young person to go and sit down and put something on tape that you can sit and evaluate yourself, or have someone who's been doing this for a while help evaluate you and point you in the right direction, that's valuable. The next thing is make connections, build that network with people. I can't tell you how many people that I've met through sports broadcasting and how many I've got on the phone now. And we all talk to one another in some way, shape, or form. And I will tell you, some of the best ones are guys that people have never heard of, in my opinion. They may be doing, D2, D3 games. I think some of the best broadcasters I've ever been around doing high school games, and they've been perfectly content to do that their entire lives. But they have something in their process or in the way that they do a game or present a game on air that, there are times when I'll just pick up the phone and I'll say, hey, I'm stuck on something here. Can you help me with that? And that network is valuable. It's valuable when you're young to kind of help you get your foot in the door, to meet more people, to meet someone who ultimately will be able to help you take that next step. But as you've been in the business for a long time, it's helpful because, again, you got to keep growing. You got to keep evolving. You can't just get stagnant. And that's where those guys come in, man. I mean, I'm not bashful about asking for help because I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I'm not. I need all the help I can get. So I would say that those are the two things that have helped me in terms of making that climb. The other thing I'll leave you with is this: two best pieces of advice I've ever been given. One came from a broadcaster. The other came from a lawyer. And as it relates to broadcast, Chuck Cooperstein does the Dallas Mavericks games on the radio. Chuck's a wonderful broadcaster, been doing it for a long time. I asked Chuck to listen to a tape once. I said, Chuck, tell me honestly what you think about it. What do I need to do to get better? And at that time, I probably was dictating the game to people. Basketball games, certainly. It was every pass, just boom, 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 very staccato. There was no conversational tone to it whatsoever. And Chuck responded with, I don't know how to tell you how to do this, but the separator between good and great is the ability to be conversational on the air. And the best who's ever done it is Vin Scully. Listen to an old Vin Scully tape, and Vin Scully sounds like he is talking directly to you. Jack Buck sounded like he was talking directly to you. That is the separator. The other piece, the attorney, was a guy named Charlie Terry, who ran a law practice in East Tennessee for more than half his life. But he was an avid supporter of Walter State athletics when I was doing the junior college games. He'd bring headphones, listen to the game. I thought that was a huge deal. And Charlie said after a game one night, I walked down, shook his hand, and he said, I listened the entire game tonight, And he said, here's what I'll tell you. There's a lot of John Ward in there. And there was. I parroted everything John Ward did because I didn't know what I was doing. And I thought if I set that example and I just kept doing that, it would have to be on the right track. And he said, instead of focusing so much on trying to be the next John Ward, why don't you focus on being the first Neil Price? And I never thought about that at 18 years old. Never. And it still is uncomfortable to think about that sometimes. But as you are forging this path in your career, try to find a way to make yourself unique. Say it in your own voice. There's nothing wrong with having people look up to. I've got a bunch of them, and I still look up to them, and I still steal from them too. But try to find a way to say it in your own voice and be your own person. I was 37 or 38 before that really started to click for me. And I'm still learning how to do that. But I think those things, it's a long answer, but those things will help anybody who's trying to do this, I think, as much as anything.
Well, thank you very much, Neil. We do appreciate that answer. And again, this has been wonderful. Thank you for joining us, taking time out of your even busier schedule now as of late, which is a good thing, not a bad thing. And congratulations again on your extremely well-deserved award. Best of luck to you and the Bulldogs going forward. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, the voice of Mississippi State University and your 2024 Mississippi Sportscaster of the Year, Neil Price. Thank you, Neil.
Thanks, Vance.